Time has elapsed. Thank you, Deputy First Minister. We now move to questions to the Minister for Justice, and I call Linda Dillon.
Question number 1.
Members will be aware that on the 13th of January I committed to a bespoke review of the Jonathan Cresswell case. It's vital that we understand and learn from this case, both in terms of safeguarding victims and managing offenders. I'm keen that the review begins as swiftly as possible. To that end, my department has prepared draft terms of reference for the review. I've written to the Chief Constable, the Chief Executive of the Probation Board for Northern Ireland and the Chief Executive of the Western Health and Social Care Trust to share and invite comments on these terms of reference and to confirm their organisation's involvement in the review. The Prison Service is also committed to engaging in this exercise. I'm reflecting on the feedback received to date. In addition, my department has engaged with a prospective independent reviewer who I am confident will take forward the review in a sensitive and comprehensive way. I intend to write to the Justice Committee shortly to confirm the final terms of reference and to provide details of the reviewer.
Ms Dillon.
Thank the Minister for your answer. Minister, can you confirm that this review will go wider than just the justice bodies? I understand that if it's your review, but we know that there were failings right across the piece in terms of health as well. So can you confirm that that is the case, and also that there will be a north-south element to it?
Well, with respect to my jurisdiction, obviously there's only so far that I can go in terms of the review. However, I'm clear it needs to be multi-agency in terms of how it will operate. The primary agencies I've already named, that is the PSNI, Northern Ireland Prison Service, Probation Board for Northern Ireland and the Western Health and Social Care Trust. However, other organisations represented, for example, on the Public Protection Arrangements Northern Ireland or on the Multi-Agency Risk Assessment Conference arrangements, which is aimed at supporting victims, may also be invited to participate in the review at the discretion of the reviewer.
McAllister.
I thank the Minister for answers so far. Minister, the murder of Katie Simpson was an absolutely horrific event, but the investigation that followed and the failings before the death of Katie and the investigation afterwards are a blight on our society. It is important that none of it is repeated. However, not just the PSNI, but as the previous member referenced, there are many bodies involved. Does the Minister agree that compliance is essential from all of the agencies involved?
Minister.
I think compliance is not only essential, I think it is the very least that we can expect from the public bodies who were involved at any stage, either with Jonathan Cresswell or with Katie Simpson, or indeed with any of his previous alleged victims. I expect key agencies will want to engage positively and constructively with the review, and so welcome the feedback that my department has already received from agencies to date on their involvement in it.
Durgan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Minister for her answers thus far and for her commitment to carry out a review of this horrific case and the horrendous handling of it. Would the Minister, I suppose, commit that the review should also engage with those most hurt by this case, be it relatives of the victim and those who suffered as well from the fallout of it?
Minister.
Well, I think it's hugely important that we do engage with the family, and that is something that we have been doing in terms of looking at the terms of reference and how we intend to move forward. It is important that Katie's family are at the very heart of the review. They feel that their questions have not yet been answered, and indeed more questions have arisen than answers have been provided. What I want is for the independent reviewer to be in a position to engage with them as a priority as the work commences.
Connie Egan.
Question number 2, please.
Sir.
In November 2024, I announced the extension of the Adult Sexual Offences Legal Advisor Scheme, or SOLA, pilot for a further 2 years until the 31st of March 2027. This SOLA service is available to all adult complainants in serious sexual offence cases up to the point of trial and has provided free, independent legal advice to 2,000 complainants since its launch in April 2021. The pilot service, which is delivered by Victim Support NI, was initially established for 2 years with the option to extend in order to test the arrangements further. My department is also currently consulting on legislative proposals for inclusion in a Victims and Witnesses of Crime Bill that would allow SOLAs to provide representation for complainants at court pre-trial in certain circumstances. I would encourage all those with an interest to respond to those proposals.
Ms. Egan.
Thank you. Minister, could I ask for an update if you have any plans to include a similar service for children?
Well, as the member will be aware, I am very keen to extend this service to young people, and I'm delighted to be able to update members that later this week I will officially launch the Children's Sexual Offences Legal Advisor Scheme in partnership with Victim Support NI. The scheme has been specifically designed to meet the needs of child complainants in serious sexual offence cases and will run for, again, an initial 2-year pilot phase. The new children's service will run in tandem with the adult SOLA service until March 2027, when both pilots will be fully evaluated to inform development and procurement of mainstream services. The new pilot will provide support to some of the most vulnerable of children and marks, I believe, another important step towards improving victims' experiences in sexual offence cases and helping them navigate the criminal justice system. One key benefit is that free advice on the criminal justice system will be available even prior to any offence being reported, which will help make victims informed about decisions and may help increase reporting.
Stuart Dixon.
Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
At the outset, I wish to put on record my condemnation of the 2 most serious recent paramilitary-style shootings which occurred, one of a teenager in Ards, the other of a pensioner in Coleraine. Such barbaric brutality has no place in our community. These attacks must stop. Statistics provided by the PSNI indicate that in 2024 there were 28 casualties of paramilitary-style attacks, a significant reduction from the 50 recorded in 2023. Within that, there were 5 casualties of paramilitary-style shootings, approximately a quarter of the number that occurred in 2023. Whilst there is likely to be a range of factors affecting the reduction, I must commend the Executive Programme on Paramilitarism and Organised Crime on the work being done to address this complex societal and generational issue. Over the last 8 years, EPOC has been testing innovative interventions aimed at tackling paramilitary harm in the here and now and breaking the cycle of violence for future generations. These interventions include those that support victims of paramilitary harm, improving outcomes for individuals and helping break the victim-perpetrator cycle. Targeted youth work delivered in a variety of ways, including through street-based initiatives and even in emergency departments, and helping to prevent young people at risk of paramilitary exploitation and abuse from becoming engaged in criminality in the first place are just some of the structures we have put in place.
Mr. Dixon.
Mr. Speaker, and thank the Minister for her statement with regards to the 2 recent events. May I ask the Minister to outline what interventions the programme makes to providing specific support for victims of paramilitary-style attacks?
Since 2021, the programme has both developed and tested a range of interventions involving over 2,500 victims of paramilitary harm who have been directly supported by the programme. This is helping to break the victim-perpetrator cycle for future generations. Key interventions include the InSync project, the first bespoke service designed for victims of paramilitary-style attacks. It was commissioned by EPOC in 2022 and is delivered by NIACRO. As well as providing support for victims of paramilitary violence, it also is actively learning about effective approaches and informing work on tackling violence and paramilitarism more generally. The Connect hospital-based youth work project places youth workers in 3 hospital emergency departments. They work as navigators, engaging young people both when they first arrive at the hospital and with community-based follow-up. As well as the work to change the language around paramilitary violence, the programme is also helping to raise awareness regarding the specific nature of the trauma caused by paramilitaries. This may mean that more service providers are better able to identify those requiring specific help and support.
Doug Beattie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister agree that the statistics on paramilitary attacks don't tell the whole story? Because when you add in money lending, racketeering, extortion, intimidation, it has a negative effect on society and could be just as harming as paramilitary-style attacks.
Without doubt, the reach of harm that paramilitaries inflict on our communities is extensive and wide-ranging, and the member has already name-checked quite a number of the most common, but of course it is not limited to that. We know things like child sexual and criminal exploitation and many others are a feature of paramilitaries in our community. Ultimately, whilst I want to seek to reduce the harm of paramilitaries in the community, what I want more than anything is to end the existence of paramilitaries in our community. That is a permanent solution to what we face as a community, and I think it needs to be accelerated.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker. Minister, one of the activities that paramilitaries have been engaged in, as well as traditional, if we can call it that, paramilitary attacks, is hate crime, particularly race hate crime in South Belfast. What is her department specifically looking to do to address that, including the provisions for standalone, it's not going to be standalone, but for hate crime legislation? Is she looking at that in her department?
Minister.
Well, as the member knows, we're very aware that paramilitaries will fly under any banner if it means that they can justify their existence to a local community or pretend that they are protagonists acting on behalf of that community, rather than the truth of the matter, which is that they're feeding off the misery in those communities. The member is also aware that I intend to bring forward, first of all, the aggravator model that was recommended by Judge Marinan in his report on hate crime as part of the sentencing bill, which we hope to bring forward in the autumn of this year. And next year, then the following year, we hope to bring forward legislation on victims and witnesses of crime, which would see more protections for vulnerable victims and witnesses extended to victims of hate crime. However, there are things we can do in the meantime and are doing in the meantime, including bespoke support to members of ethnic minority and different racial groups within society, and also providing reassurance around the work that the department is doing more widely to try to combat these ills.
Gary Carroll.
Last week, the Communities Minister removed the intimidation points for people who are victims of paramilitary-style violence. Does your department have any concern about what impact this will have on people's safety and ability to live a life free from paramilitaries?
Well, as I was very clear, whilst I welcome the fact that the paramilitaries, the extra points, have been changed to reflect the wider harms that happen in our society, for example, domestic violence and sexual abuse, which was very much a secondary consideration when it came to people being able to claim points for homelessness. I also recognised in my statement the importance of ensuring that people no longer are being driven from their homes by these organisations or individuals. We now need to focus, I think, as an executive, on how we ensure people can remain in their homes safely, rather than allowing people to dictate where and when people can live at peace and get on with their lives.
Nick Matheson.
Speaker, question number 4.
Minister.
As Justice Minister, I'm acutely aware of the daily and cumulative impact of trauma, because the justice system is often the place of last resort for people and communities with trauma. Justice agencies like Youth Justice and Probation are leading the way in showing how to adopt trauma-informed approaches in specialist services. That includes rethinking how we make every point of contact with the service users an opportunity for support rather than potential re-traumatisation. This is essential if we want to stop the revolving door of hurt and futility that passes through generations affected by trauma. It also matters because trauma, and particularly complex trauma, is costly. Adverse childhood experiences alone cost Northern Ireland an estimated $1.3 billion annually. This is most acutely felt across justice, education, health and social care sectors. The Executive Programme for Paramilitarism and Organised Crime has led the way in championing a trauma-informed Northern Ireland, and for trauma to feature in the programme for government. This is not just about providing specialist services. We all need some understanding of trauma, how it affects our decision-making and perspectives, as well as our communities and public sector workforces.
Mr Matheson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her answer. In a previous answer, the Minister had referenced the Executive Programme for Paramilitarism and Organised Crime. Can the Minister give any examples of the work this programme is doing around the impact of trauma and adverse childhood experiences on young people?
Well, at the moment, EPOC is the sole funder of the Safeguarding Board for Northern Ireland's work on developing trauma-informed approaches across the system, and has been briefing all parties and the Justice Committee on what has been learned through the programme. This applies to paramilitary harm, but also goes much wider. On the 6th of February, we will also plug a significant gap in our knowledge when the EPOC programme launches its findings of a new groundbreaking research on the prevalence of trauma in the adult population in Northern Ireland. I'll be attending. All executive ministers have been invited. I'd encourage you all to attend the launch as well, and or read the report and its findings when they're available. Our challenge then will be to develop a comprehensive response that matches the scale of the needs identified.
Colin Crawford.
Mr Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her answers thus far. Can the Minister outline how she is tackling this issue source in schools with collaboration with the Education Department? Thank you.
Minister.
Well, the executive-wide programme includes work that goes on in schools, and indeed there are many good initiatives within the school system in terms of tackling paramilitarism, but particularly looking at trauma-informed approaches. So I can think of two clear examples. One would be the approach we've taken around trauma-informed approaches around the Encompass programme, where we inform schools now if a child has been subject to a domestic abuse incident or has been in a household where a domestic incident has occurred overnight, so that that child will receive a more trauma-informed response when they arrive at school. And the second one, I think, is the work that's being done around child criminal and sexual exploitation, where the Health Minister, myself and the Education Minister jointly launched a strategy to deal with that issue, because we recognise that many of those vulnerabilities will present often in a healthcare setting or in a school setting, and it's important that people are fully understanding of the kind of red flags that they should watch for.
Sorry, Andrew McMurray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And question number 5.
Minister.
Work has progressed at pace since I announced the programme on the 2nd of December, and I've now published the programme delivery plan for consultation. The consultation will be critical in ensuring we're examining issues in the right order and properly take account of interconnectivities. But I've been clear we do not have the luxury of time if we're to deliver the system our citizens deserve, and I intend to make progress wherever possible while the consultation is ongoing. That includes steps to give effect to an uplift in fees for publicly funded advice and representation, the consultation on which also launched last week. I've prioritised this work to ensure the continued viability and stability of the system, but other actions will follow and follow quickly. I'm conscious each set of proposals within the plan will require detailed engagement in supporting legislation and administrative frameworks, so we cannot delay the realisation of the benefits if we're to seize the opportunity the reform programme presents to ensure a fairer, more accessible, proportionate, responsive and cost-effective system which places the citizen at its heart.
Mr. McMurray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the Minister for the answers thus far. Can the Minister clarify whether the delay in publishing the delivery plan has delayed implementation of the fees uplift?
Minister.
I thank the member for the opportunity to clarify, and the answer is no, it hasn't. When I launched the programme in December, I noted my intention to progress a fees uplift as soon as possible and to consult on the proposed uplift in January with a view to implementing changes in May. There is a significant amount of work involved and the timetable is ambitious, but I've committed resources to ensure it can be achieved. With the publication of the fees consultation last week, we remain on track to deliver on that schedule.
John Bunting.
Mr. Speaker, given the Bar's decision to extend its strike, could I ask what engagement the Minister has had with the profession recently around the Burgess Review, and whilst I'm aware of the consultation, what more might be done to move all of this towards a resolution in weeks rather than months by the end of the consultation? And also, if I might, what does she consider to be the social value of legal aid?
Well, I think to answer those in reverse, I think the social value of legal aid is that it provides access to justice for those who could not otherwise afford to access justice. I see it as part of the welfare system, and I see it as part of the security net that is provided for our citizens, and therefore it is important that we are able to ensure that it is directed to the most needy and vulnerable at the right point in time. When it comes to engagement with the criminal bar, we have had ongoing engagement, both myself and the department, over recent weeks and months. I will be meeting with the Law Society and indeed the criminal solicitors tomorrow, and we'll also be meeting with the criminal bar tomorrow afternoon. And my objective is to bring this action to a close, because I believe that we have moved some considerable way. I was asked originally, the demands were the Burgess report would be published. It has been published. I was asked that whatever Burgess asked for by way of uplift would be provided. I've said 16% will be provided. I can't do it immediately, which is the latest request. It's impossible to do so, but I can do it. And then the third aspect of the ask was that we would implement Burgess. And if you look at the wider enabling access to justice landscape, that has been met. Indeed, one of the reasons I delayed until this month rather than going to consultation in December was to take account of concerns that the criminal bar had raised about some of the measures that we were proposing in that programme, and I have therefore adjusted the programme to take account of that in order to try and meet resolution. However, when you seek to meet someone halfway, Mr. Speaker, it is important that that person then doesn't regress from that position if you're going to have any success. So hopefully tomorrow we will be in a position to actually close the gap rather than simply move the gap to a different place.
Diana Armstrong.
Thank
thank you to the Minister for her answers to this point. Minister, could I ask how you and your department are tackling continued fraud and error in the legal aid budget?
There has been a significant reduction in fraud and error in the legal aid budget over recent years, and our accounts have made great progress over that time by bearing down on those elements of the legal aid system where there are errors, and the majority, by the way, it is error rather than fraud. But it is also important as part of the Enabling Access to Justice the Enabling Access to Justice programme that I've just spoken about, that we bring all of those aspects of the legal aid system that are currently quite opaque, and we shine the light of transparency and accountability into those in a way that hasn't been able to happen previously. And so that is part of the reform that I want to make, so that we can account for public money in a way that the public can see, where we have full insight into the mechanisms that are being used to grant legal aid, whether that's by the courts or by the Legal Services Agency, and that we have confidence that money is reaching the people in greatest need at their point of greatest need.
Justin McNulty.
Gormai about Count Carla and thank the Minister for her answers thus far. Can the Minister confirm if and how she is ensuring that justice users, practitioners, NGOs and other experts are and have been structurally involved and inputting to the review from day one? And can the Minister explain the reference in the review to bringing publicly funded legal services within the purview of the Department, and if this could, for example, mean the PPS?
Minister.
Well, no, it doesn't reference the PPS, but it does reference other ways that we can deliver justice in a frontline way. So there are many organisations, particularly third sector organisations, who offer legal advice, competent legal advice to people, but who do so in a different structure to that which we normally focus on when we come to this with individual legal practices. So we want to make sure that their voices are also heard in this conversation. Throughout this process, I mean, we've talked about the Burgess report. That was only one element of a number of reviews that have been undertaken of both civil and criminal legal aid. The professions have been involved, the other providers have been involved, and the public, crucially, have been involved. I mean, in the end of the day, I'm not the employer of the professions. I am there to provide legal aid to the citizen, so the citizen can employ someone who can represent them in court, and it has to be about what is best for the citizen. I do respect the need for us to have a thriving legal profession, however, if people are to be able to do that, and so it's about striking that balance in the right place without letting anyone who may have a pecuniary interest in legal aid to dictate terms in terms of how we do that.
Deirdre Hargett.
I suppose I welcome the fact that you're meeting with the associations tomorrow in terms of the legal aid issue, and you said, Minister, that a 16% uplift will be provided. Can you give details as to when?
Well, the intention is that the legislation which will underpin it will be completed. It will complete its passage. It will be secondary legislation by May. That's the intention. As you know, I've foreshortened the consultation on it to 8 weeks because I believe it's a targeted consultation, given that it affects a more narrow group of people. And we will obviously have further conversations tomorrow about the commencement date for that particular 16% uplift. What's important, however, to recognise is that I didn't pluck that 16% uplift out of the air. It was a recommendation based on evidence in the Burgess report, and therefore those who are now telling me that it's a paltry sum and that it should be discounted and I should go with some other more inflated figure, I think need to come to a point of realisation that without an evidential basis, that simply is not on the table. So we've got to look at what Tom Burgess actually recommended. We've got to get it delivered, and I've said as quickly as possible we will do that, and then we've got to get people back to work, because at the core of all of this, there are victims who are being re-traumatised by delay in the criminal justice system. And these are people who are using the Crown Courts. We're talking here about rape victims, about murder victims and their families. We're talking about people who are awaiting trials to take place. And it is incredibly re-traumatising for them, not just to be told that their case is adjourned, but indefinitely adjourned because there is no end in sight. I want to bring this to a conclusion. I don't believe strike action was necessary, given that I was about to publish my intentions around this. I believe we have moved some considerable distance since I did. I don't believe the extension is necessary either. But I'm going to sit down tomorrow. We're going to work through this, because I think it's in all our interests, including the criminal bar, that we bring this to a conclusion.
Alan Buckley. Minister.
The work of prison officers is challenging, complex and often overlooked, but critical to the safety and security of Northern Ireland and to the people held in custody. In 2020, there were 32 assaults on staff. In 2021, there were 71. In 2022, 66. In 2023, 59. And in 2024, 96. The prison service experience is that a higher population and crowding are the most significant factors contributing to prison instability, incidents and violence. Any assault on a prison officer, Mr Speaker, is unacceptable, and the prison service continues to maintain a clear focus on the safety of staff at establishments. In addition to the support services available to all civil servants and in recognition of the frontline challenging role of prison officers, the Northern Ireland Prison Service provides additional support to officers through the Police Rehabilitation and Retraining Trust.
Mr Buckley.
Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her answer. Like her, I agree, every single attack on a prison officer is beyond comprehension and should be condemned rightly in this place. But to treble the number of attacks in 4 years is quite astonishing. So can I ask the Minister for her assessment in perhaps the numbers within specialised prison officer units that deal in combat with extreme and violent prisoners? Is there enough people being recruited to this particular aspect of the prison life? And overall recruitment within the prison service, has it been impacted by this startling rise in attacks?
Minister.
Well, to be clear, in 2020 there were 32 assaults on staff when we were at a period where we had our lowest prison numbers during COVID. To compare what happened this year with that year, when we are now at our largest ever prison population, I think is an unjust comparison. So, for example, if you look back, last year it was 59, the year before 66. It goes up and down each time, but what we do know is that the size of the population will directly impact on the level of volatility within the prisons. In terms of training, I have to say to the member that every prison officer is trained to deal with conflict, with de-escalation, with restraint, and ensuring that violence within the prison is contained as quickly as possible. And it's important that that is the case because prisons can be a volatile place and therefore that violence can happen. We have recruited additional numbers of prison officers, and we continue to do that, and there is no indication that the level of violence in our prisons has been one of the issues that has in any way deterred people from applying. In fact, when we go out to seek out prison officers during a recruitment process, we're normally well oversubscribed.
Robbie Butler.
Speaker, I thank the Minister for her answer and her interest in the prison service. She's right to say that it is often oversubscribed, but staff retention is incredibly difficult, and I would contend that one of the reasons for that is that the circumstances that are held within the Civil Service Staff Handbook. The Department of Finance has said that it is no longer appropriate for those details to be held within the Civil Service Handbook. Would the Minister for Justice agree?
Well, I am not aware of the Department of Finance having changed its position with respect to the employment of prison officers under the normal Civil Service Code. However, the governance in prisons is, as you know, through the normal prison rules and the application of prison rules. And where someone assaults a prison officer, we expect that that will be prosecuted where that is possible. So that pertains in the prison system. We also have additional measures in place that would not be available to the wider civil service when it comes to support for officers who have been subject either to psychological trauma or to physical trauma. And what we're finding is, I think more and more, the people are actually taking that up and are very welcoming of the support that they get.
Blair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question number 7.
Sir.
I'm very keen that there should be greater openness, transparency and accountability in the conduct of court business, as I believe that increasing the public's understanding of what the judiciary does and how judicial decisions are made will enhance confidence and trust in the justice system. One initiative which I believe would assist in delivering this would be to permit the recording and broadcasting of certain court proceedings. Work on this proposal is well advanced. I hope to launch a public consultation within the next couple of months, but in the meantime, I will be discussing this and other potential transparency measures with the Lady Chief Justice.
Mr. Blair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for the information provided there. Can I ask if the Minister agrees that reporting on proceedings in the family courts would help to increase transparency in the justice system?
Sure.
Well, this is an issue which has been raised with me by many people who have been victims of domestic violence and sexual abuse and who then find themselves in the family courts after the breakdown of their relationship. I'm of the view that permitting media reporting of proceedings concerning children in the family courts would be a helpful initiative to increase openness in the family courts, provided there are sufficient safeguards in place to protect the privacy of the children and the families involved. And I think that is incredibly important given the sensitivity of the issues that the family courts deal with. The issue, as I say, has been raised with me, and my officials are now undertaking scoping work, including looking at the judiciary-led reporting pilot in England and Wales. Further to that work, I intend to raise this with the Lady Chief Justice shortly in the context of that wider discussion regarding what we can both do to enhance openness and transparency of the justice system.
Question 8.
My department is not in the business of putting people into boxes, nor is it a responsibility of the department to define the number of gender categories that exist. Our responsibility is to support everyone who comes into contact with the justice system, regardless of their gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, health, disability, age and sexual orientation, and many other considerations. Many of those who come into contact with the justice system are among the most vulnerable within society and have a range of very complex needs, including addictions, poor mental health and physical health. Indeed, many have suffered trauma or have been victims themselves. It is for this very reason that all those who come into contact with the justice system are treated with respect as individuals with their own needs and complexities, irrespective of how they identify.
Moving to topicals, call just McNulty.
Minister, I met with the Criminal Justice Inspectorate last week and they told me that there are now 120 women in prison here, more than half of whom are on remand. Can the Minister explain why the number of women in prison has increased by 200% since before the pandemic, when there were just 40 women imprisoned?
Minister.
There are a number of reasons why there are more women in prison today as opposed to during the pandemic. First of all, there was a concerted effort to remove people from the prison system during the pandemic, and many people have brought people forward, cases forward post-pandemic that might otherwise have happened during that period. So that's one reason in terms of delay. Second reason is, I think, down to the crisis that we have in terms of the economic crisis. Many of the women who are committed to our care will be guilty of acquisitive crime. It may be drugs related, it may be out of desperation, but it will often lead people to be in the criminal justice system, and therefore the increase in numbers, I suppose, tallies with that. However, there is a wider issue that the member hints at, and that is the number of people in the prison system more generally who are on remand. We are doing a bespoke piece of work within the Criminal Justice Board to look at the reasons for remand, because they do seem to be incredibly high. They are incredibly high throughout the UK, but they are higher again in Northern Ireland. And it's something that I think we need to look at in terms of the reasons as to why people are committed to prison rather than given community-based sentences. And also, as a department, we are looking at how we can build in more confidence in community-based sentences that will allow judges then not to send people to prison, where an alternative, and potentially a better alternative for rehabilitation in the community, may exist.
Mr. McNulty.
Thank you, Minister, for your answer. And just it was before the pandemic, not during the pandemic, which the question related to. Can the Minister outline what measures her department and her executive colleagues are adopting and implementing to tackle the reasons for offending, including challenges faced around housing, addiction, poverty, trauma and employability?
Well, as the member, I think, demonstrates in his question, many of the issues that will prevent offending are not the responsibility of the Department of Justice. They fall to other departments, whether that be Department for the Economy, whether it be Department for Communities, or indeed other departments beyond that. It is important, however, that we do take a trauma-informed approach. We recognise that our women's prisons and those within our women's prisons are a different category of offender, often driven by different motivations and behaviours, and therefore it's important that we factor that into the rehabilitation of those women who come into our care, and that is something the Prison Service has been leading on, in addition to all of the work that goes on while people are in prison, to ensure that rather than recycling people through the system, we can successfully rehabilitate people outside the prison system by finding them accommodation before they leave prison, by assisting them with access, for example, to key services like the health service, the housing executive and others, whilst still in prison, to set up a path for success rather than a cliff edge for failure.
John Mulholland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. Earlier you alluded to some of the issues at the heart of the Criminal Bar Association's withdrawal of services. Could the Minister please clarify the Criminal Bar Association's current demands as you understand them?
Well, as I've noted previously, the demands do appear to have evolved over recent days. I believe that I met the demands which were set out in November: publication of the Burgess Review, implementation of an uplift in fees without delay, and a timetable for reform. Further requests were then received in December that included that I abandon the legislative and governance processes to uplift the fees immediately, that the Burgess Review be implemented in full, including the appointment of independent chairs to working groups and legal aid advisory boards, and that I abandon my proposal to review the approach to cases left on the books. I have addressed those issues, Mr Speaker, insofar as is possible. I delayed the publication of the delivery plan to respond to them. I reiterated my commitment to implementing the 16% uplift at the nearest opportunity. Consultation to enable that to be implemented in May launched last week. That uplift cannot be applied any sooner, and I cannot and I will not circumvent due process. It would not be appropriate for me to do so. I also cannot abandon the exploration of policy issues. Evidence suggests might produce better outcomes and a better use of resources for the public. Policy development cannot be subject to a veto of one stakeholder group, but I have sought to reassure that, as always, exploration will be in conjunction with stakeholders. Each of the proposals in the delivery plan will be subject to detailed consultation in their own right, and having listened to the professions, I've amended that plan to reflect that I'll consider some issues in slower time to allow that engagement to come to fruition.
Ms Mulholland.
Mr Speaker, Minister, do you consider that those demands could be met?
Where I can meet demands, or at least offer compromises, I have already sought to do so. I am willing to continue to try to do so. However, some of the demands, such as an immediate change to legal aid, is simply impossible. I will be making it clear to the Criminal Bar Association, as I have in this House when I meet them tomorrow, that I am willing to meet them halfway. I want this to be resolved. I want people to be back at work. I want cases to start to proceed, because whilst I focused in my last answer on the impact on victims, be under no illusions. When victims withdraw cooperation from the PPS and cases fail, the guilty and the innocent both walk free. And that is not good for society. That places us all at risk, and we're talking here about serious criminal cases. The impact this is having on the service providers right across justice is not insignificant in terms of victim and witness care, for example, in PPS, and in terms of victim service. What we need to do now is get back to a point where we are looking at what can be achieved, what is realistic, what is possible, and I am willing to lean in and try to make this situation as pain-free as possible in terms of resolution. But there are some things that simply can't be done, and I'm afraid taking direction on what I can and cannot consider as a minister is one of those non-negotiables.
Peter Martin.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Can I ask the Minister if she can provide reassurance to the House that there are no plans to either run down or close the PSNI station in Holywood?
Sure.
No, because it's not my decision whether or not PSNI stations remain open, closed, or are refurbished, or anything else. The estate strategy is entirely a matter for the Chief Constable, and he is answerable to the board for that. So I can't provide the reassurance that the member seeks, because it isn't within my purview, and I would encourage him to engage directly with the PSNI about the matter.
Mr Martin.
Thank the Minister for her answer. Could I therefore ask for an update, if she's aware of one, in terms of the new PSNI Kinnegad training facility, and at what point that process is at?
Minister.
Well, again, this is something that falls outside my purview. The PSNI's decision to purchase Kinnegad, I think, is now a matter of public record. My understanding is that it has been taken forward to the board, but I would suggest the member speaks to his colleagues who sit on the board about progress in that regard, and to the Chief Constable directly, as they will be the people who direct this. It will have to come from within their existing resource base, and they've already made that clear, but I can't give any other updates on that.
Cheryl Brownlee.
Thank you to the Minister for her answer so far. Just touching on from my colleague Jonathan Buckley in terms of attacks on prison officers, as he alluded to, it has trebled. There's 96 attacks, and any attack is too many. So in terms of what measures are actually in place to protect prison officers against violent attacks while they're on duty, and do you intend to improve and increase this?
Minister.
Our prisons are actually, relatively speaking, incredibly safe places in comparison to other similar prisons. So, for example, if you look at recent reviews of the prisons estate, by SIGINI, they would indicate that levels of violence are lower than their comparable establishments elsewhere. However, rightly you say that any attack on a prison officer is unacceptable, so the first thing is to make clear to every prisoner that when their behaviour is unacceptable, when they resort to violence or abuse, it will be first of all dealt with through prison rules in terms of the impact on their regime and privileges. It will also potentially be escalated to a police investigation where that is possible, because it is important that if people abuse a prison officer, or for that matter a police officer while they're doing their job, we actually hold them to account. And one of the things obviously that I'm hoping to do in the sentencing bill, which I hope to introduce at the end of the year, is to introduce an aggravator for those attacking somebody who works in the public service or is delivering a service to the public, which I hope will act as an added deterrent. In terms of training, people are trained in terms of de-escalation techniques. They are trained in terms of restraint. They are also trained in terms of use of protective measures, so that they're able to keep themselves and their colleagues and other prisoners safe. And we intend no significant changes in that regime, because to date it has been reasonably successful and without serious incident.
Ms Brownlie.
Thank you to the Minister for her answer. Do you believe that there is sufficient health and well-being supports for officers that have suffered attacks within the prison?
Minister.
Well, I think we can always do better, so I would never want to stand here and say, yes, I think it is sufficient, but I think there is good support in place, whether that's through the work that's done within the prisons in terms of resilience, whether that's the training of new officers, or whether it's access to PRRT. And I think if you look at the uptake, both from serving and former officers, for that service in particular, you will see that people actually do value the ability to be able to get both psychological support and physiotherapy and other physical interventions that may help them either to return to work more quickly, or where that is not possible, to be able to be rehabilitated and find other opportunities to work in the community.
Thank you, Mrs. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. I was really pleased to see the launch of the Power to Change campaign, and I wonder if the Minister agrees with me that in order to eliminate and prevent violence against women and girls, not just to address it, it requires a societal changes to attitudes and behaviours completely across society.
Minister.
I completely agree with my colleague. As no one will be surprised to hear. But I have to say that having prioritised violence against women and girls, domestic and sexual abuse and violence throughout my time as Justice Minister, I think it was important when I took the proposal to the Executive to say that we wanted to have a strategy to tackle violence against women and girls, that it wasn't for the Justice Department to take that forward. It was a matter that should be taken forward by the Executive Office on behalf of the whole Executive. Because if we know anything about violence against women and girls, we know that it is about challenging not just actions, but the microaggressions and the attitudes which are the foundation on which those actions and violent attacks are built. Those insidious attitudes and behaviours that underpin gender-based violence. And so it's important, I believe, that we work not only with women and girls, but that we listen carefully to the voices of young men and men in general as to the contribution that they have the power to make to changing society and ensuring that women and girls are better protected. Many young men are now being radicalised online by a form of extremism around misogyny, incel culture, call it what you wish, but it is an incredibly dark place on the internet. And I think it's really important that PSNI, the Executive Office and my own department have come together with this programme which hands the power back to people in real life to challenge those sorts of attitudes, those sorts of behaviours and those sorts of microaggressions that can make young women and young girls feel safe.
Ms Nicholl.
Thank you, Minister, for your answer and for the important work you're doing in this space. Can I ask how the campaign will evolve going forward?
Minister.
Initially, the focus is specifically aimed at encouraging men and boys to consider their attitudes and behaviours towards women and girls, and also to challenge attitudes and behaviours which they find unacceptable around them, giving them mechanisms to do so in a way that is safe. The campaign will then evolve to cover the steps that wider society should take to end all gender-based violence, and I think there are real opportunities through using the toolkit that's online for us to open up a wider conversation around how we treat women and girls in society. It's not enough that women and girls have to raise these issues. These are not women's issues, they are societal issues, and until women and girls feel safe in our community, we still have much work to do.
Paula Bradshaw.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Minister, can you please outline how your proposed enabling access to justice reforms might help support work on speeding up justice? Thank you.
Brief response, please, Minister.
The Enabling Access to Justice Reform Programme is seeking to ensure that processes and procedures aid efficiency and incentivise early resolution. So the programme is looking at supporting ongoing work by the Criminal Justice Board to reduce delay and enable structured early engagement by ensuring remuneration structures support those objectives. The procedures add value and expedite and encourage resolution and aid transparency.
Thank you, Minister. That brings to a conclusion questions to the Minister for Justice. Good, you're a bit better this month, Minister. We'll move on to... sorry? Okay. The members take their ease for a moment. Oh, here we are. Deborah Erskine has given notice of an urgent oral question to the Minister for the Economy. I remind members that if they wish to ask a supplementary question, they should rise continually in their places. The member who tabled the question will be called automatically to ask a supplementary